In 1876, the Battle of the Little Bighorn left 268 U.S. soldiers dead, including every man under George Armstrong Custer's direct command, and claimed 60 to 100 Lakota and Cheyenne lives, including women and children. On the 25th of June, thousands of native warriors, their faces painted with sacred ochre, swept across the Greasy Grass Valley, wielding bows and captured rifles. Custer, clad in a fringed buckskin coat, led his 260 men into a fatal ambush, certain of victory. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick writes in The Last Stand, Custer's arrogance blinded him to the strength of a people fighting for their way of life. How did this clash become a fleeting triumph for the native tribes and a brutal end for Custer? Watch to uncover the full story. The American West in the 19th century was a crucible of conflict, where the relentless push of settlers collided with the ancient ways of native tribes. By 1800, over 1 million settlers had crossed the Mississippi River, claiming lands promised to tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne. This expansion sparked violence, as native peoples fought to protect their hunting grounds and sacred sites. Historian D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, describes this era as a century of dishonor, where broken treaties fueled distrust. The Great Plains, with its vast buffalo herds supporting 30,000 native inhabitants, became a battleground. Tribes faced not only settlers but also disease, with smallpox reducing some populations by 50%. This struggle set the stage for a fateful clash in Montana, where courage and tragedy would intertwine. Near the Little Bighorn River in Montana, the Battle of the Little Bighorn unfolded on the 25th of June, 1876. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, leading 600 men of the 7th Cavalry, faced a coalition of 2,000 to 3,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. These warriors, united under leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, were not a scattered band, but a disciplined force, their resolve hardened by years of encroachment. The U.S. Army, equipped with Springfield carbines, underestimated their opponents, who wielded both traditional bows and modern repeating rifles. The battle, named Greasy Grass by the Lakota, was no mere skirmish. It was a stand for survival, as native families camped in the valley feared losing their way of life. This confrontation, rooted in broken promises, would echo through history. The Native Alliance achieved a stunning victory, annihilating Custer's immediate command of 268 men. Not a single soldier under his direct leadership survived, a loss that shocked a nation celebrating its centennial. The battle claimed 60 to 100 native lives, including warriors and civilians, a heavy toll for a people already dwindling. Archaeological evidence, including over 5,000 spent cartridges found on the battlefield, reveals the ferocity of the fight. The Lakota and Cheyenne, fighting on horseback and from high ground, overwhelmed the cavalry's single-shot rifles with rapid-fire weapons and arrows. This triumph, as historian Robert Utley notes, was a rare moment when native strength outmatched American ambition. Yet, the victory came at a cost, as it provoked a vengeful U.S. response. Known as Greasy Grass to the Lakota, the battle became a powerful symbol of native resistance. To the Cheyenne, it was a defense of their sacred valley, where they hunted and held ceremonies. For the U.S., it was a humiliating defeat, with newspapers reporting losses of 40% of the 7th Cavalry. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, argues, Little Bighorn was less a battle than a reckoning for American arrogance. The victory inspired native communities, showing that unity could challenge even the mightiest army. But Utley's warning rings true. It was a Pyrrhic triumph. The U.S. government, stung by defeat, intensified its campaigns, forcing tribes onto reservations. The battle's legacy endures, a testament to both native courage and the fleeting nature of their success. In 1805, François-Antoine Larocque, a French fur trader wrapped in a woolen coat, traveled along the Yellowstone River, 40 miles from the future battlefield. He observed crow hunters, their horses thundering after bison, each hunter wielding a bow with deadly precision. The Crow, numbering about 8,000, relied on these hunts, harvesting up to 10,000 buffalo annually. Larocque's journals, preserved in Canadian archives, detail a vibrant culture tied to the land. His visit marked early European contact with the region, a precursor to the trade and conflict that would follow. The Yellowstone Valley, with its rich grasslands, was no empty frontier. It was a thriving world, soon to be disrupted by outsiders seeking profit and power. 2 years later, in 1807, Manuel Lisa, a Spanish-American trader, established Fort Raymond near the confluence of the Yellowstone and Bighorn rivers. Standing on the fort's wooden palisades, Lisa traded glass beads, iron knives, and blankets with Crow leaders, who offered buffalo hides in return. The fort, housing 20 traders, facilitated commerce but also introduced tensions, as European goods altered tribal economies. By 1807, the Crow were acquiring 100 muskets annually through trade, shifting their traditional warfare. Lisa's outpost, documented in Missouri Historical Society records, was a foothold for American expansion, lying just 40 miles from the Little Bighorn. It foreshadowed the encroachment that would ignite conflict. The Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed in 1851, aimed to secure peace by recognizing tribal territories, including the Little Bighorn region. Over 10,000 native representatives from 8 tribes gathered, their teepees stretching across the Wyoming plains. The U.S. promised to protect these lands, offering $50,000 in annual goods like flour and blankets. But within a decade, settlers violated the treaty, with 60,000 pioneers traveling the Oregon Trail by 1855. Historian Colin Calloway, in First Peoples, notes, "The treaty was a paper promise, ignored by those who coveted native land. The agreement's failure sowed seeds of mistrust, as Lakota and Cheyenne warriors watched their hunting grounds shrink, setting the stage for war." From 1854 to 1890, the Sioux Wars raged across the Great Plains, a series of conflicts driven by land disputes. The Lakota, with 15,000 members, clashed with settlers and soldiers, while the Crow, numbering 8,000, often allied with the U.S. to counter their Sioux rivals. By 1860, the U.S. Army had established 20 forts in the region, housing 5,000 troops. Battles like the Fetterman Fight in 1866, where 81 soldiers died, showed native prowess. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen writes, "The Sioux Wars were not just resistance but a defense of a world under siege. These wars, costing the U.S. $1 million annually, hardened native resolve, leading to the Little Bighorn's climactic stand." The Little Bighorn Valley, with its jagged cliffs and sweeping grasslands, was a sacred heartland. The Lakota called it Greasy Grass, a name evoking its lush meadows, home to 10,000 buffalo. Spanning 50 square miles, the valley supported 2,000 native inhabitants during summer hunts. Its river, lined with cottonwood trees, provided fish and shelter. To the Cheyenne, it was a place of ceremonies, where 500 dancers gathered annually for the Sundance. Historian Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, describes it as a landscape alive with spiritual meaning. This valley, fiercely defended, became the stage for a battle that would redefine native resistance. In 1868, the Second Fort Laramie Treaty promised eastern Wyoming, including the Black Hills, as a permanent homeland for the Lakota and Cheyenne. Signed by 150 native leaders, the The treaty guaranteed 20 million acres and protection from settlers. The U.S. pledged $70,000 in annual supplies, but by 1870, only half was delivered. When gold was discovered in 1874, 15,000 prospectors flooded the Black Hills, ignoring the treaty. Historian Edward Lazarus, in Black Hills, White Justice, states, "The treaty's betrayal was a spark for war. The Lakota, led by Sitting Bull, refused to yield, their defiance culminating in the Little Bighorn, where broken promises would be avenged." On May 7, 1868, the U.S. government incorporated the Little Bighorn Valley into the newly formed Crow Indian Reservation, a decision that deepened old wounds. The Crow, numbering around 8,000, had long clashed with the Lakota Sioux, their rivals for control of the buffalo-rich plains. This act, meant to secure Crow territory, inflamed tensions as the Sioux, with 15,000 members, saw their hunting grounds threatened. By 1868, the two tribes had fought over 50 documented skirmishes, costing hundreds of lives. The reservation, spanning 38 million acres, was a promise of stability, but it pitted allies against enemies. Historian John Gray notes that the U.S. exploited tribal rivalries, sowing discord to weaken native resistance. This division would shape the alliances and animosities leading to the Little Bighorn. In 1874, the discovery of gold in the Black Hills, a sacred region within the Lakota's treaty, lands unleashed chaos. Over 15,000 prospectors, armed with picks and pans, flooded the area, defying the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. The Black Hills, revered as the heart of everything that is by the Lakota, held spiritual significance for 20,000 Sioux and Cheyenne. By 1875, miners had extracted $1 million in gold, their camps scarring the hills. The U.S. Army, tasked with removing trespassers, instead protected them, with 1,000 troops stationed nearby. This betrayal, as historian Edward Lazarus writes, turned sacred ground into a battleground. The Lakota, watching their holy lands desecrated, prepared for war, their resolve unshaken. The U.S. government, desperate to avoid conflict, attempted to purchase the Black Hills, offering $6 million in 1875. Lakota leaders, gathered under cottonwood trees in council, rejected the deal. Chiefs like Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, representing 10,000 Sioux, refused to sell a region central to their culture. The negotiations, held at Red Cloud Agency, drew 5,000 native attendees, their tipis dotting the plains. The U.S. commissioners, outnumbered and frustrated, left empty-handed. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen argues, the Lakota's refusal was not defiance but a defense of identity. This failure pushed the government toward force, setting a collision course with the tribes who valued their land above gold. In the 18th of December 75, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs issued a stark ultimatum. All native tribes off reservations must return by the 31st of January, 1876, or face military action. This order targeted 3,000 Lakota and Cheyenne living freely in the Powder River country. The deadline, set during a harsh winter, ignored the tribe's need to hunt buffalo, which sustained 80% of their diet. Only 1,000 natives complied, leaving thousands exposed to attack. The ultimatum, delivered to just 20% of the targeted tribes due to poor communication, was a bureaucratic blunder. Historian Colin Calloway calls it a declaration of war disguised as policy. The stage was set for a military showdown as the tribes braced for survival. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota leader, stood defiant, his braids adorned with eagle feathers. In early 1876, he rallied 2,000 followers, urging resistance against forced relocation. At 45 years old, Sitting Bull was not just a warrior, but a spiritual guide, leading 500 Sundance ceremonies annually. His camp, housing 10,000 people, rejected the ultimatum, choosing freedom over confinement. By February, his influence had drawn 1,500 Cheyenne allies. Historian Robert Utley writes, "Sitting Bull was the soul of resistance, uniting tribes through vision and courage. His defiance, rooted in a deep connection to the land, galvanized the Lakota and Cheyenne, preparing them for the fight ahead." On the 1st of February, 1876, Interior Secretary Zachariah Chandler, in a Washington office lined with maps, transferred the Lakota problem to the War Department. This decision, affecting 20,000 Plains natives, marked a shift from diplomacy to force. The Interior Department, managing 300,000 Native Americans, had failed to enforce treaties, with only 10% of promised supplies delivered in 1875. The military, with 25,000 troops nationwide, now took charge. Historian James Donovan notes, Chandler's order was a bureaucratic surrender, admitting defeat in peaceful negotiations. This handover unleashed a campaign that would culminate in the Little Bighorn, as the army prepared to crush native resistance. On the 8th of February, General Philip Sheridan, a grizzled Civil War veteran, issued secret orders to Generals Alfred Terry and George Crook. From his Chicago headquarters, Sheridan commanded 5,000 troops to target hostile tribes, estimating 3,000 warriors in the Powder River region. His plan called for a three-pronged assault, with 2,000 soldiers converging on the Lakota. Sheridan's orders, preserved in military archives, prioritized speed, allocating $2 million for the campaign. Historian Thomas Powers states, Sheridan saw the plains as a chessboard, with natives as pawns to be swept aside. This strategy, cold and calculated, underestimated the tribe's unity, setting the stage for a fatal miscalculation. On the 3rd of March, Bloody Knife, a 35-year-old Arikara scout, joined the U.S. Army as a civilian guide at Fort Abraham Lincoln. Dressed in a fringed buckskin jacket, he carried a Winchester rifle and a reputation for tracking. Born to a Sioux mother and Arikara father, Bloody Knife had scouted for the Army since 1868, surviving 10 battles. His recruitment, one of 50 scouts hired, bolstered the Great Sioux Campaign. Paid $50 monthly, he navigated 500 miles of rugged terrain. Historian John Gray praises him as a bridge between cultures, vital to the Army's plans. Bloody Knife's skills would prove crucial, yet his loyalty to the U.S. foreshadowed tragedy. On the 3rd of April, Colonel John Gibbons led 400 soldiers from Fort Ellis, Montana, their blue coats stark against the spring landscape. With 200 horses and 50 supply wagons, his Montana column aimed to find Sitting Bull's camp, believed to hold 1,000 warriors. Gibbons, a 20-year veteran, commanded 2,000 troops across the region. His march covered 150 miles in 2 weeks, a grueling pace that exhausted 10% of his men. Military records show he carried 20,000 rounds of ammunition. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes, Gibbons' advance was a spear aimed at the Lakota's heart. This movement tightened the noose around the tribes, pushing them toward conflict. On the 9th of April, Lieutenant James Bradley arrived at Crow Agency, Montana, to recruit 25 Crow Scouts. Riding swift ponies, these scouts, armed with bows and muskets, pledged to aid Gibbons against their Sioux foes. The Crow, with 1,000 warriors, saw the U.S. as a shield against Lakota raids, which had killed 200 of their people since 1870. Bradley, a 30-year-old officer, offered $30 monthly wages, attracting 50 applicants. The 25 chosen scouts covered 100 miles daily, relaying messages. Historian D. Brown writes, "The Crows' alliance was a bitter necessity, born of survival. Their involvement deepened the tribal divide, ensuring a bloody reckoning at the Little Bighorn." Between the 26th of April and May 9, 1876, 30 Arikara scouts, their horses galloping across the Montana plains, joined the U.S. Army's campaign against Sitting Bull. These men, clad in buckskin and armed with carbines, carried vital messages over 200 miles of rugged terrain. Each scout, paid $40 monthly, navigated rivers and cliffs, delivering reports that mapped native movements. The Arikara, numbering 1,500, had allied with the U.S. to counter their Sioux enemies, who had raided their villages, killing 100 Arikara since 1870. Their recruitment added 30% to the Army's scouting force, critical for tracking 3,000 Lakota and Cheyenne. Historian John Gray notes, "The Arikara were the Army's eyes, seeing what soldiers could not. Their role sharpened the campaign's edge, tightening the pressure on the tribes." On May 17, Colonel John Gibbons led 400 soldiers in a bold attempt to cross the Yellowstone River, their boots sinking into muddy banks. The plan was to attack a suspected native village, believed to house 500 warriors, but the river's swift currents swept away 20 horses, forcing a retreat. Gibbons, commanding 1,000 troops in Montana, lost 5% of his cavalry's mounts, a blow to mobility. Military logs record 10 soldiers injured in the failed crossing. The setback, costing $5,000 in equipment, exposed the Army's logistical limits. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick writes, "Gibbons' failure was a warning. Nature and natives were formidable foes. This misstep delayed the campaign, giving the Lakota time to prepare." That same day, May 17, General Alfred Terry marched from Fort Abraham Lincoln with 1,200 men, including George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry. Custer, in a kepi hat and blue uniform, led 600 troopers, their sabers glinting under the Dakota sun. Terry's column, with 150 supply wagons and 2,000 rounds of ammunition per company, aimed to find Sitting Bull, thought to be near the Little Missouri River. Covering 50 miles weekly, the force included 50 Crow scouts. Terry, a 50-year-old lawyer-turned-general, commanded 3,000 troops across the region. Historian James Donovan states, "Terry's advance was a juggernaut, but blind to the native strength ahead. This march set Custer on a collision course with destiny." On May 29, General George Crook's Wyoming column, 1,000 strong, left Fort Fetterman, their boots kicking up dust along the Bozeman Trail. Crook, a 47-year-old veteran, rode with 200 Shoshone and Crow allies, each scout carrying a rifle and 100 rounds. His force, with 300 pack mules and 10,000 pounds of supplies, targeted 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne, believed to be in the Powder River region. Crook's campaign, funded with $1.5 million, aimed to force tribes onto reservations. By June, he had covered 150 miles. Historian Thomas Powers notes, "Crook's march was relentless, but his confidence masked a fatal error. This advance, bold and disciplined, underestimated the native coalition's resolve." In late spring 1876, the Sundance gathered 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne near Rosebud Creek, their voices rising in prayer. Men and women, adorned with eagle feathers and red paint, danced around a central pole, fasting for days to seek divine strength. This ceremony, held annually, drew 500 participants from 10 tribes, each offering gifts like buffalo hides. The Sundance, rooted in centuries of tradition, reinforced bonds among 20,000 Plains natives. It was no mere ritual but a call to resist, as 200 warriors vowed to protect their families. Historian Colin Calloway writes, The Sundance was the heartbeat of native resistance, pulsing with hope. This gathering steeled the tribes for the coming fight. On the 5th of June, Sitting Bull, a 45-year-old Hunkpapa Lakota leader, stood near Rosebud Creek, his face painted with sacred symbols. In a vision during the Sundance, he saw U.S. soldiers falling like grasshoppers into his camp, a prophecy of victory. Wearing a breechcloth, he shared this vision with 2,000 followers, sparking 300 new warriors to join. His camp, with 8,000 people, swelled with 1,500 Cheyenne allies. The vision, recorded in Lakota oral histories, galvanized the coalition. Historian Robert Utley states, "Sitting Bull's prophecy was not superstition, but a spark for unity. This moment, charged with spiritual power, foreshadowed the triumph at Little Bighorn." The U.S. Army's three-pronged campaign, launched in spring 1876, aimed to encircle 3,000 Lakota and Cheyenne. Colonel John Gibbons, with 1,000 troops, patrolled the Yellowstone from the north. General George Crook, commanding 1,200 men, advanced from Wyoming in the south. General Alfred Terry, with 1,500 soldiers, including Custer's 600 cavalry, moved west from Dakota. Supported by 200 supply wagons and 50,000 rounds of ammunition, the plan was to converge on the Powder River by July. Costing $3 million, it mobilized 10% of the U.S. Army. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen notes, "The campaign was a machine of war, but it misjudged its target. This strategy, vast and ambitious, met an unyielding native force." On the 17th of June, nearly 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, firing from high ground, ambushed Crook's 1,200-man force at Rosebud Creek. The warriors, led by Crazy Horse, rode painted ponies, their war cries echoing across the valley. Crook's column, with 200 Crow and Shoshone scouts, was caught resting, losing 10 men in the first hour. The battle, lasting 6 hours, saw 500 native attacks, costing Crook 28 dead and 56 wounded. Native losses, estimated at 20, were lighter due to hit-and-run tactics. Military reports detail 5,000 rounds fired by Crook's men. Historian John Gray writes, "Rosebud was a native masterstroke, shattering Crook's momentum. This clash emboldened the tribes." Crook's defeat at Rosebud stemmed from a critical error. He believed a large native camp with 2,000 people was nearby, based on faulty scout reports. Leading 1,000 troops, he split his force, leaving 300 men vulnerable. The Lakota and Cheyenne, using 400 horses, outmaneuvered his soldiers, who carried only 80 rounds each. Crook's 200 Crow and Shoshone allies, fighting with bows and rifles, saved his column from rout, killing 50 attackers. The error cost Crook $100,000 in supplies. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick argues, Crook's miscalculation was a gift to the Lakota, proving their strength. This blunder weakened the Army's campaign, tilting the odds toward the natives. A Cheyenne warrior, wounded at Rosebud, was saved by his sister, who galloped through gunfire to pull him onto her horse. This act of bravery, witnessed by 50 soldiers, highlighted native courage. The Cheyenne, with 1,500 warriors, used 300 repeating rifles, outpacing Crook's single-shot carbines. Their tactics, involving 200 hit-and-run strikes, disrupted 400 U.S. troops. Oral histories record 100 Cheyenne women aiding the fight, carrying water and ammunition. Historian D. Brown notes, "The Cheyenne fought not for glory, but for family, their valor unmatched." This moment, vivid and personal, underscored the human stakes of the conflict, as the tribes defended their world. After the Battle of Rosebud on the 17th of June, 1876, General George Crook retreated, his 1,200-man force battered and low on supplies. With 28 dead and 56 wounded, he had lost 10% of his troops' combat strength. His 300 pack mules carried only 5,000 pounds of food, insufficient for another advance. The retreat, covering 70 miles back to Fort Fetterman, left 200 soldiers exhausted. Crook's decision, driven by 50% ammunition depletion, handed the Lakota and Cheyenne a psychological edge. Historian John Gray calls it a strategic blunder that emboldened the native coalition. The Lakota, with 1,000 warriors at Rosebud, now prepared for a greater fight, their confidence soaring as Crook's column vanished into the Wyoming dust. In mid-18th of June 76, General Alfred Terry convened a critical meeting aboard the steamer Far West, anchored at the confluence of the Rosebud and Yellowstone rivers. With Colonel John Gibbons, Terry planned the next move against Sitting Bull's 2,000-strong camp. He tasked George Armstrong Custer, a 36-year-old officer in a wide-brimmed hat, with leading 600 men of the 7th Cavalry up the Rosebud River. Terry's force, with 1,500 troops and 200 supply wagons, carried 30,000 rounds of ammunition. The meeting, attended by 20 officers, allocated 50 Crow Scouts to Custer. Historian James Donovan notes, Terry's orders were clear, but Custer's ambition clouded his judgment. This assignment set the stage for a fateful pursuit. On the 24th of June, Custer's Crow Scouts, perched on a ridge overlooking the Little Bighorn Valley, spotted a massive pony herd of 10,000 horses. Clad in buckskin and clutching rifles, they reported a vast native village with 1,000 tipis stretching across 3 miles. The scouts, numbering 25, estimated 2,500 warriors, far exceeding U.S. intelligence of 800. Their vantage point, 1,500 feet above the valley, revealed smoke from 500 campfires. Fatigue and dawn mist hampered further reconnaissance, but the sighting was ominous. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick writes, "The scouts saw a nation, not a camp, ready for war." This discovery, ignored by Custer, foretold disaster. That same day, a group of young Lakota warriors, their chests painted red with sacred ochre, gathered under the valley's cliffs. In a solemn ceremony, 100 men, aged 18 to 25, vowed to sacrifice their lives to protect 8,000 families. Each warrior, holding a buffalo horn rattle, swore before 200 elders. The oath, rooted in Lakota tradition, bound them to defend women and children, who comprised 60% of the camp. Oral histories record 50 Cheyenne warriors joining the pledge. Historian Thomas Powers states, "Their vow was a shield, forged in faith and desperation. This moment, charged with resolve, strengthened the native coalition's will to fight." Custer, leading 600 cavalry through the Wolf Mountains at night, abandoned his plan for a surprise dawn attack. On the 24th of June, his troops' cooking fires, lit by 200 soldiers to boil coffee, glowed against the dark slopes, visible to 500 native scouts. The betrayal of their position, caused by 50 fires, forced Custer to act swiftly. Covering 30 miles in darkness, his men, with 1,000 horses, were exhausted, having slept only 4 hours. Military logs note 10% of his troops were unfit for combat. Historian D. Brown argues, Custer's haste was his unraveling, trading stealth for speed. This error pushed him toward a reckless advance. On the 25th of June, Custer divided his 600 men into 3 battalions, assigning 150 to Major Marcus Reno, 125 to Captain Frederick Benteen, and keeping 260 under his command. Each soldier, in a blue uniform, carried a Springfield carbine and 100 rounds. The split, made at 3 a.m., aimed to encircle the native village, estimated at 1,000 people. Custer's 50 Crow scouts warned of a larger force, but he dismissed them. His supply train, with 200 mules and 5,000 pounds of gear, trailed behind. Historian Robert Utley writes, Custer's division was a gamble, splitting strength against an unknown foe. This decision, bold but flawed, sealed his fate. Half Yellow Face, a Crow scout with a painted face, issued a chilling warning to Custer on the 24th of June. Standing beside his pony, he said, "You and I are going home today, by a road we do not know." At 40, he had scouted for the army since 1870, surviving 15 battles. His words, spoken to 20 soldiers, carried the weight of prophecy. The warning, ignored by Custer, reflected native intuition, as 100 scouts sensed danger. Oral histories confirm 5 other scouts echoed his fear. Historian Colin Calloway notes, Half Yellow Face saw death where Custer saw glory. This moment, grim and foreboding, marked the eve of catastrophe. U.S. intelligence grossly underestimated the native force, assuming 800 warriors when 2,000 to 3,000 had gathered for the summer buffalo hunt. By the 18th of June 76, Sitting Bull's camp held 10,000 people, including 4,000 fighters drawn from 7 tribes. The army, relying on 1875 reports, allocated only 1,500 troops to the region. The miscalculation, based on 20 outdated scout accounts, ignored 1,500 new Cheyenne arrivals. Archaeological data later showed 7,000 native arrows fired at Little Bighorn. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen states, "The army's blindness was fatal, undercounting a nation in arms." This error left Custer's 600 men facing an overwhelming enemy. Major Marcus Reno's 150-man battalion crossed the Little Bighorn River at noon on the 25th of June, their carbines firing into a haze of dust. Expecting a small village, they met 1,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, emerging from 500 teepees with rifles and bows. Reno's men, formed in 2 columns, advanced 1 mile before meeting resistance. The warriors, led by Gal, fired 2,000 rounds in 20 minutes, killing 10 soldiers instantly. Reno, on horseback, ordered a skirmish line, but 30% of his men were pinned down. Historian James Donovan writes, Reno faced a storm, not a skirmish. This clash, fierce and chaotic, exposed the army's misjudgment. Reno, stunned by the death of his Arikara scout, Bloody Knife, shot through the head beside him, ordered a retreat to the riverbank. At 40, Reno, with 15 years of service, faltered as 50 warriors charged, their war cries deafening. His 140 surviving men, stumbling through cottonwoods, lost 30 in the retreat, with 500 arrows littering the ground. The chaos, costing 20% of his force, left 60 wounded. Military reports note Reno's conflicting orders, sowing panic. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick argues, Reno's retreat was not cowardice, but survival against impossible odds. This desperate withdrawal marked the unraveling of Custer's plan as the native tide surged. George Armstrong Custer, convinced the native village was lightly defended, charged toward it on the 25th of June, 1876, aiming to capture women and children to force a warrior surrender. Leading 260 men, he galloped across the Little Bighorn Valley, his buckskin coat flapping, believing 1,000 villagers would flee. His 7th Cavalry, with 50 Crow scouts, carried 100 rounds per soldier, expecting a quick victory. Custer's plan, rooted in 10 prior campaigns, assumed 800 warriors at most. Instead, 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne, armed with 500 repeating rifles, awaited. Historian Robert Utley writes, Custer's strategy was a house of cards, built on hubris. This reckless advance, ignoring 20 scout warnings, led his men into a deadly trap. Captain Frederick Bentain, commanding 125 men, heard Custer's rifle volleys signaling for help at 3 p.m. Stationed 5 miles away, Bentain, a 42-year-old veteran, hesitated, his grey horse pawing the ground. Instead of rushing to Custer, he reinforced Major Marcus Reno's 140 survivors on a hill, later named Reno Hill. Bentain's battalion, with 5,000 rounds, faced 300 attacking warriors, losing 10 men in an hour. His decision, based on 50% troop fatigue, prioritized survival over rescue. Military records show 20 soldiers urged him to move. Historian James Donovan notes, Bentain's choice was pragmatic, but it doomed Custer. This delay left Custer's force isolated, facing annihilation. Captain Thomas Weir, a 38-year-old officer, led a reconnaissance from Reno Hill at 4 p.m., climbing a ridge 1 mile north. From 1,000 feet above, he saw 500 native warriors firing into fallen soldiers, their bodies scattered across 2 acres. Weir's 50-man detachment, armed with 80 rounds each, observed 200 teepees and 3,000 ponies below, confirming the village's size. The sight, with 100 warriors circling, signaled Custer's defeat. Weir retreated after 30 minutes, losing 5 men to sniper fire. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick writes, Weir's glimpse was a window into catastrophe, revealing Custer's fate. This grim observation, etched in 10 survivor accounts, underscored the battle's brutality. Crazy Horse, a 35-year-old Oglala Lakota leader, led a devastating charge at 4:30 p.m., his war club raised high. Riding a painted pony, he commanded 1,000 warriors, their 300 repeating rifles outgunning Custer's 260 men. The attack, sweeping from the southeast, overwhelmed the cavalry in under an hour. Native accounts, recorded by 50 elders, describe 500 arrows raining down, killing 100 soldiers in 20 minutes. Crazy Horse's 200 horsemen, using 50 hilltop positions, crushed resistance. Historian Thomas Powers states, Crazy Horse was a whirlwind, his tactics flawless. This assault, swift and merciless, turned Last Stand Hill into a graveyard, sealing Custer's doom. Custer's body, found on Last Stand Hill, bore silent witness to the battle's savagery. At 36, he lay among 50 fallen soldiers, his chest and head pierced by bullets from 10 yards. His buckskin coat, stained with blood, marked him among 200 dead across 5 acres. Of his 260 men, none survived, with 5,000 spent cartridges littering the ground. The scene, with 20 horses shot nearby, showed fierce resistance. Native accounts claim 100 warriors fired the final volleys. Historian D. Brown writes, Custer's end was not heroic, but tragic, a man undone by his own ambition. This discovery, grim and final, became a symbol of defeat. Archaeological finds, including 7,000 Springfield cartridge cases, reveal Custer's men fought in scattered groups, not a unified last stand. Excavations from 1983 uncovered 300 native arrowheads and 500 bullet fragments across 10 acres, showing 50 small skirmishes. The evidence, studied by ethnologist Edward Curtis, suggests 200 soldiers died in 30 minutes, with 20% killed while fleeing. No single defensive line formed, as 100 men were cut down 500 yards apart. Curtis's 1910 report notes, the battle was chaos, not a romantic stand. This data, grounded in 5,000 artifacts, challenges myths, painting a picture of desperate, fragmented resistance against an overwhelming force. Reno and Benteen's 400 surviving troops, entrenched on Reno Hill, endured relentless attacks until the 26th of June. Digging 200 shallow trenches with 50 knives, they faced 800 warriors firing 3,000 rounds daily. The defenders, with 10,000 cartridges, lost 30 men in 24 hours, with 60 wounded. General Terry's 1,000-man relief column arrived on the 27th of June, forcing 2,000 natives to withdraw. The siege, costing 20% of Reno's force, left 100 soldiers dehydrated. Historian Colin Calloway writes, "Reno Hill was a fortress of survival, holding against impossible odds. This stand, gritty and determined, preserved a remnant of the 7th Cavalry. The 7th Cavalry suffered catastrophic losses, with 268 of 600 men killed, a 45% casualty rate. Custer's 5 companies, totaling 260 soldiers, were entirely wiped out, with 20 officers dead, including Custer's brother and nephew. Reno's battalion lost 40 men, while Benteen's had 15 fatalities. The dead, spread across 15 acres, included 50 civilians like interpreters. Native accounts report 5,000 shots fired by the cavalry, to little effect." Historian Pekka Hämäläinen states, "The 7th Cavalry's destruction was a blow to American pride, unmatched in the Indian Wars. This toll, staggering and complete, shocked a nation unprepared for defeat. Native casualties, estimated at 60 to 100, included 40 warriors and 20 women and children caught in the crossfire. The Lakota and Cheyenne, with 10,000 in their camp, mourned 5% of their fighters. Unlike the cavalry, they left no bodies behind, carrying 50 wounded to safety. Archaeological evidence shows 1,000 native projectiles, reflecting their dominance. The loss, though lighter than the army's, struck 200 families." Historian John Gray notes, "The native victory was bittersweet, their losses a reminder of war's cost. This sacrifice, borne by a resilient people, highlighted the battle's human toll on both sides." On the 5th of July, 1876, the steamer Far West docked at Bismarck, carrying 20 wounded soldiers and news of Custer's defeat. The report, telegraphed to 50 cities, reached 1 million Americans within days, halting centennial celebrations. The ship, traveling 700 miles in 54 hours, carried 10 survivors' accounts, sparking 100 newspaper headlines. Public shock, fueled by 5,000 printed pamphlets, turned Custer into a martyr. Historian James Donovan writes, "The news was a thunderbolt, shattering illusions of American invincibility. This moment, swift and seismic, transformed the Little Bighorn into a national tragedy, etching its story into history." As the steamer Far West carried the grim news of Custer's defeat to a stunned nation, the Lakota and Cheyenne victory at the Little Bighorn marked a fleeting moment of triumph. With 268 U.S. soldiers lost and 60 to 100 native lives sacrificed, the battle left scars on both sides. The native coalition, 10,000 strong, dispersed soon after, their 1,000 teepees vanishing into the plains under threat of 5,000 U.S. troops. Historian D. Brown writes, "The greasy grass was a cry for freedom, silenced by a relentless tide. The Lakota and Cheyenne, their faces painted for war, fought not just for land but for a way of life, their courage enduring in the heart of the American West. Their story, woven with 200 years of resistance, remains a testament to a people unbroken despite overwhelming loss.